Mom, why does Grandpa have pictures of you sleeping? Daniel's voice cut through my morning coffee like a blade, and I watched my world tilt sideways in real time. My name is Sarah Chin Morrison, 36, marketing director, and the woman whose 15-year-old son just found the photos I'd spent 23 years pretending didn't exist. The mug slipped from my hands, ceramic exploding against the kitchen floor like every carefully constructed lie I'd built our lives on. Daniel stood in my doorway holding his grandfather's old camera, the same Polaroid camera I remembered from camping trips that happened when nightmares were supposed to end, not begin. His face was pale, confused, holding evidence of something he was too young to understand but old enough to know was wrong. Where did you get that? Grandpa left it at our house last week. I was just trying to fix it for him, and these pictures fell out. His voice cracked on the last word. Mom, these aren't normal pictures. I forced myself to move, glass crunching under my bare feet as I crossed to him. There were 4 Polaroids in his shaking hands, old, faded, but unmistakably me at 13. Sleeping, vulnerable, stolen moments captured by someone who should have been protecting me instead of documenting his crimes. Daniel, give me those. No. He pulled them back, and I saw something shift in his expression. Mom, I'm not stupid. These weren't taken by accident, were they? The question hung between us like a loaded gun. Because my son was right, he wasn't stupid. He was 15, almost 16, smart enough to understand predatory behavior when it was literally in his hands. Mom, answer me. Did Grandpa take these while you were sleeping? I looked at my son, tall now, voice changing. So close to the age when my father had decided I was old enough for his special attention, and realized I was standing at the same crossroads that had defined my entire adult life. Tell the truth and shatter everything, or lie and risk history repeating itself. Yes. The word came out like a confession, and I watched Daniel's face change in real time. Not just shock, but understanding. The kind of adult understanding that no 15-year-old should ever have to carry. Jesus Christ. He sat down hard in the kitchen chair, still holding the photos like evidence. How old were you? 13. Your age when I met your father. Were there more pictures? I thought about the safe in my father's basement that I'd never been allowed to see, about all the camping trips with all the different children over all the decades, about how predators don't just take victims, they take trophies. I think so. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, staring at the photographs with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle he didn't want the answer to. When he looked up, his eyes were harder than I'd ever seen them. He wanted to take me camping next weekend. The ice that flooded my chest was instant and complete. What did you tell him? I told him I'd think about it. Daniel's voice was steady, but his hands were shaking. Mom, were you going to let me go? The question was a knife between my ribs because for 3 months, I'd been finding excuses, buying time, telling myself I could manage the situation without having to explain why. Without having to admit that the grandfather my son loved was the same man who'd stolen my childhood one camping trip at a time. No. Never. But Daniel, I should have told you why years ago. Why didn't you? Because I was still 13 and terrified. Because I'd spent 23 years protecting my father's reputation instead of protecting other children. Because keeping family secrets had been drilled into me so deeply that even now, holding evidence of his crimes, part of me wanted to find a way to explain it all away. Because I was a coward. My phone buzzed on the counter. Text message from my father, looking forward to the camping trip with Daniel. Should we leave Friday or Saturday? Daniel read the message over my shoulder. He doesn't know you found the pictures. No. What if there are other kids? Daniel's voice was getting stronger, more determined. What if right now, there are other boys like me, and their parents think Grandpa's just a nice old man who wants to help? The questions hit me like physical blows because they were the questions I'd been avoiding for decades. How many children had trusted my father because I'd stayed silent? How many families had handed over their sons because they believed the image he'd cultivated? I don't know. Mom, we have to call the police. The words I'd been dreading and hoping for simultaneously. Because my 15-year-old son was braver than I'd been at 36. He was looking at evidence of sexual abuse and thinking about other potential victims instead of family reputation. Daniel, if we do this, everything changes. Our family, the way people look at us, your relationship with Uncle Tommy and the rest of the family. Once we make this call, there's no taking it back. Good. His voice was flat, final. If Grandpa's been hurting kids for 20 years and we don't call, how is that different from helping him do it? The moral clarity was devastating because it was true. My silence hadn't been neutral. It had been complicity. My phone rang. My father. Daniel and I stared at the screen, watching his name flash like a warning. I let it go to voicemail, but the damage was done. My father had impeccable timing. He always seemed to call when I was most vulnerable, most likely to doubt myself. "Don't answer," Daniel said. "Not until we call the police. What if he suspects something? What if he runs? Then at least we tried." Daniel stood up, still holding the photographs. "Mom, I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. If you don't call the police today, and next week I read about some kid getting hurt, how are you going to live with that?" The question was cruel in its simplicity because there was no good answer. I couldn't live with that. I'd been barely living with my own silence for 23 years. "You're right. I know I'm right." He walked to the junk drawer, pulled out the phone book, and started flipping pages. "What's the number for the police station?" I watched my 15-year-old son take charge of a situation I'd been running from for 2 decades, and I realized something that should have terrified me but instead felt like relief. I wasn't the parent in this relationship anymore. Daniel was protecting me now, the way I should have been protecting him all along. "Daniel, I'm proud of you. For being braver than your mother." He looked up from the phone book, and for a moment I saw the little boy who used to crawl into my bed after nightmares. "Mom, you were 13. You were a kid. But I'm almost 16, and I know what predators look like now." My phone buzzed again. Another text from my father. "Sarah, call me. We need to discuss Daniel's camping trip." The casual entitlement in those words, the assumption that he still had access to my son, that his plans were still moving forward, made something snap inside me. "Daniel, make the call." "You sure?" I looked at the photographs in his hands, evidence of crimes that had shaped every relationship I'd ever had, every fear I'd ever carried, every protective instinct that had kept me hypervigilant for 15 years. "I'm sure." As Daniel dialed, I realized this wasn't just about stopping my father. This was about teaching my son that truth was more important than comfort, that protecting children mattered more than protecting family secrets, that sometimes love meant destroying the thing you'd spent your life trying to save. My father had taught me that secrets were loyalty. My son was teaching me that secrets were poison. The police dispatcher answered on the second ring, and I heard Daniel's voice, steady and clear. "I'd like to report a sexual predator." 23 years of silence ended with those 6 words. The police station waiting room smelled like industrial disinfectant and fear, and I couldn't stop checking my phone every 30 seconds. 12 missed calls from my father since Daniel and I had left the house with the photographs. 12 calls in 45 minutes, the desperate frequency of a man who knew his world was collapsing. "Mrs. Morrison?" Detective Lisa Chen appeared in the waiting room doorway, and something about her calm professionalism made the knot in my chest loosen slightly. "Daniel? Thank you for coming in." The interview room was smaller than I'd expected, more conference room than interrogation chamber. Daniel had insisted on coming with me, and now he sat beside me with the photographs arranged on the table like evidence in a trial that was 23 years overdue. "Before we start," Detective Chen said, settling into her chair across from us, "I need you to understand that what you're alleging is serious. These photos suggest a pattern of predatory behavior that may have been ongoing for decades." My phone buzzed. Text from my father. "Sarah, where are you? I'm at your house and you're not here. Daniel's supposed to help me pack for our trip." Detective Chen glanced at the phone. "Is that him?" "Yes. He's at our house right now, looking for Daniel." "Does he have a key?" The question hit me like ice water because yes, my father had a key to my house. I'd given it to him years ago for emergencies, back when I'd still been operating under the delusion that careful supervision was enough to keep my son safe. "Detective, what if he goes into Daniel's room? What if he plants something or takes something?" Daniel spoke up. "Mom, what could he plant?" The question was innocent, but Detective Chen's expression darkened. "Mrs. Morrison, in cases like this, perpetrators sometimes try to manipulate evidence. They might plant inappropriate materials in a victim's room to discredit their testimony, or they might take personal items that could be used for intimidation." My phone rang. My father again. Don't answer, Detective Chin said. But Mrs. Morrison, I need you to tell me exactly what happened during those camping trips. Start from the beginning, and don't leave anything out. The words came easier than I'd expected, like lancing a wound that had been festering for decades. I told her about the special daughter comments, the isolated campsites, the single tent that was supposedly normal for family camping. I told her about the gentle voice explaining special love, about hands that were never rough because predators understand that violence leaves evidence. He made it sound like a gift, I said, watching Detective Chin take notes. That was mature enough to handle something most girls couldn't understand. That's classic grooming behavior, she said. Making the victim feel special, chosen, mature. Did he ever threaten you directly? He didn't need to. He convinced me that telling anyone would destroy our family. That my mother wouldn't understand. That people would blame me for not stopping it. Daniel had been quiet through most of the interview, but now he spoke up. Detective, my grandfather's been calling our house every day for weeks about this camping trip. Sometimes multiple times a day. Is that normal? How multiple? Yesterday he called 6 times. The day before that, 4 times. Always asking about the camping trip, always trying to nail down specific dates and times. Detective Chin stopped writing. That suggests urgency. Mrs. Morrison, has your father ever shown this level of persistence about spending time with Daniel before? I thought about it, and the pattern was suddenly, terrifyingly clear. Not until Daniel hit his growth spurt. Not until he started looking more like a teenager than a child. How old is Daniel now? 15. The same age you were when the abuse stopped. The connection hit me like a physical blow because I'd never made it before. My father hadn't stopped abusing me because I'd gotten strong enough to say no. He'd stopped because I'd gotten too old for his preferences. My phone buzzed with another text. Sarah, I found Daniel's soccer uniform in his room. Such a good-looking boy. You should be proud of how he's growing up. Detective Chan read the message over my shoulder, and I watched her expression harden. Mrs. Morrison, that message suggests your father is currently in your son's bedroom, and the phrasing is inappropriate. We need to get a patrol car to your house immediately. What? Daniel's voice cracked. He's in my room right now? Why? I asked, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew. My father was looking for something in Daniel's room, school photos, clothing, anything he could use to maintain the fantasy of access and control. Detective Chin was already on her radio, calling for units to be dispatched to my address. Mrs. Morrison, I need you to think carefully. Has your father ever given Daniel gifts? Clothing, sports equipment, anything that might seem generous but could be used to maintain psychological control? The birthday money. The baseball glove that was too expensive. The new cleats every season, always in Daniel's exact size, always purchased without being asked. He buys Daniel things constantly. Always says it's because he wants to be the grandfather who really invests in his grandson's future. That's another control mechanism. Predators use gifts to create a sense of debt and obligation. Detective Chen's radio crackled with confirmation that units were en route to my house. Mrs. Morrison, we need to discuss next steps. Based on what you've told me and the photographic evidence, we have probable cause for a search warrant. A search warrant? For your father's house. If he's been taking photographs of children for decades, there will be more evidence. Predators are compulsive documenters, they keep trophies. My phone rang again. This time it was my brother. Should I answer this? Put it on speaker, Detective Chin said. Sarah, what the hell is going on? Dad just called me crying, saying you've lost your mind and he's worried about Daniel's safety. He wants me to come over and talk sense into you. The manipulation was textbook, positioning himself as the concerned grandfather while making me look like the unstable daughter. Recruiting family members to pressure me into backing down. Tommy, where's Dad now? He's on his way to your house. Sarah, he's genuinely worried about you. Maybe you should talk to someone about these memories you're having. The gaslighting was already starting. Family closing ranks around the version of events that kept everyone comfortable. But Detective Chen was taking notes, documenting the pattern of manipulation and intimidation. Tommy, I have to go. Sarah, don't do anything you'll regret. Think about what this will do to our family. After I hung up, Detective Chan looked at me with something that might have been sympathy. Mrs. Morrison, this is about to get much more difficult. Your family will pressure you to recant. Your father's lawyer will try to discredit these photos. People in your community will choose sides. What do you think we should do? I think you should decide whether you're ready to see this through to the end. Because once we execute that search warrant, there's no going back. I looked at Daniel, this brave boy who'd found evidence of crimes and immediately thought about other potential victims instead of family reputation. Who'd called the police without hesitation because protecting children mattered more than protecting secrets. Detective, how long will the search warrant take? We could have it by this afternoon. My phone buzzed. Text from my father. Sarah, I'm outside your house and I can see police cars. What have you done? Call me immediately. The panic in that message, the immediate assumption that police presence was related to him, told me everything I needed to know about his guilt and his fear. Daniel, I said, are you ready for this? Mom, are you? I thought about 13-year-old me, confused and ashamed and convinced that keeping secrets was love. I thought about all the other children who might be carrying similar secrets, protecting men who didn't deserve protection. Yes, I said. I'm ready. Detective Chen nodded and reached for her radio. This is Detective Chen. We're ready to proceed with the search warrant request. 23 years of silence was ending, not with whispered confessions in therapy rooms, but with police radios and evidence bags and the institutional machinery of justice finally grinding into motion. My father had taught me that secrets kept families safe. I was about to teach him that some secrets are crimes. The phone rang at 7:30 the next morning, and I knew it was my father before I checked the caller ID. He had that kind of timing, always calling when I was most vulnerable, most likely to answer without thinking. I let it ring 4 times while I stared at his name on the screen, then picked up because avoiding him had become a full-time job I couldn't afford anymore. Good morning, sweetheart. His voice was warm, familiar, the same voice that had read me bedtime stories and taught me to ride a bike. I hope I'm not calling too early. No, Dad. We're up. I watched Daniel at the kitchen table, methodically eating cereal while pretending not to listen. He'd barely slept, and neither had I. We'd spent most of the night sitting in the living room, not talking, just existing in the new reality I'd created with my confession. Listen, I was thinking about Daniel's camping trip. Maybe this weekend isn't the best time after all, the weather forecast looks iffy. But I was wondering if he'd like to come over this afternoon instead. I could teach him how to tie proper fishing knots. A man should know how to tie proper knots. The phrase hit me like a slap. I'd heard those exact words before, had them whispered to me in a dark tent while my father's hands taught me things no 13-year-old should learn. A good daughter should know how to tie proper knots, Sarah. It shows you can follow instructions. Actually, Dad, I was hoping we could talk today. Just you and me. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. There are some things we need to discuss. There was a pause, long enough for me to hear him processing the shift in my tone. Of course, sweetheart, you can talk to me about anything. Why don't you come over for lunch? I'll make that tuna salad you used to love. The domesticity of it, the casual mention of tuna salad, the invitation into his kitchen where he'd make me food with the same hands that had stolen my childhood, made my stomach turn. But I needed to try this first. I needed to give him the chance to acknowledge what he'd done, to promise it would never happen again, to prove that maybe, somehow, this could be resolved without destroying everything. I'll be there at noon, I said. After I hung up, Daniel looked at me across the breakfast table. You're going to see him? I have to try talking to him first. I couldn't finish the sentence. Before we called the police. Before we shattered our family's public image. Before we opened wounds that might never heal. Mom. Daniel's voice was careful, older than his 15 years. People like Grandpa don't usually just stop because you ask them to. I knew he was right. But I also knew that once I made the call I was considering, there would be no taking it back. My father would become a registered sex offender. Our family would become the subject of whispered conversations and pitying looks. My brother would have to live with the knowledge that he'd defended a predator for 40 years. I have to try diplomacy first, I said. I owe our family that much. Daniel nodded, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. The same doubt that was eating at my chest like acid. At noon, I stood on my father's front porch, the same porch where I'd waited for the school bus, where he'd taught me to tie my shoes, where he'd waved goodbye to me when I left for college and thought I was finally free. He answered the door with that same warm smile, dressed in his Sunday clothes even though it was Tuesday, looking every inch the respectable man everyone believed him to be. "Sarah, sweetheart." He hugged me, and I forced myself not to pull away even though his touch felt like poison on my skin. "You look tired. Are you getting enough rest?" His house smelled exactly the same as it had when I was a child: coffee, furniture polish, and the faint scent of the aftershave he'd worn for as long as I could remember. Family photos lined the hallway, pictures of graduations, Christmas mornings, camping trips, including several photos of those father-daughter camping trips that everyone had thought were so sweet. "I made lunch," he said, gesturing toward the kitchen. "Nothing fancy, but I remembered how you used to love my tuna salad sandwiches." We sat at the same kitchen table where I'd done homework while Mom worked late shifts at the hospital. Where he'd helped me with math problems and praised my good grades. Where he'd told me I was smart, special, destined for great things. "So," he said, cutting his sandwich into precise triangles, "what did you want to talk about?" I studied his face, looking for some sign that he knew why I was there. But he seemed genuinely calm, genuinely pleased to have me in his kitchen. Maybe that was what made it so difficult, how normal he could seem, how easily he moved between being the loving father and being the man who'd violated that love. "I want to talk about Daniel," I said finally. His face lit up. "Oh, Daniel. He's growing up so fast, isn't he? Becoming quite the young man." I was just telling Harold Peterson at church how proud I am of my grandson. 15 years old and already taller than his old grandpa. "Dad." I set down my sandwich untouched. "Daniel isn't going camping with you. He's never going camping with you. And I need you to stop asking." The change in his expression was subtle but unmistakable. The warmth didn't leave his eyes exactly, but something sharp moved behind it. "Sarah, sweetheart, I'm not sure I understand. Daniel and I have been planning this trip for months. He's excited about it." "No, he's not. And I'm not comfortable with overnight trips." "Not comfortable?" He leaned back in his chair, and I recognized the posture from my childhood, the way he'd sit when he was disappointed in me, when I'd done something that required correction. "Sarah, I raised you. I think I know how to take care of my own grandson." The words hung between us, loaded with meaning. He was reminding me that he'd taken care of me too. That what he'd done, he'd framed as care. "Dad, I know what happened on our camping trips." There. I'd said it. The words I'd been rehearsing in my car for the 20-minute drive over here, the accusation I'd been carrying for 23 years. He was quiet for a long moment, and I watched him carefully, looking for guilt, shame, some acknowledgement of what he'd done. Instead, he reached across the table and patted my hand with the same gentle patience he'd shown when I was 13 and confused. "Sweetheart, I think you might be misremembering some things. Childhood memories can be tricky, especially when we're under stress." His voice was kind, concerned, the voice of a father worried about his daughter's mental health. "Have you been sleeping? You mentioned you were tired. Sometimes when we're exhausted, our minds can play tricks on us." I stared at him, watching him rewrite history with the same calm confidence he'd always possessed. "I'm not misremembering anything. Sarah, honey, I understand you're protective of Daniel. That's natural, you're a good mother. But you can't let your imagination run away with you. I've never done anything inappropriate with you or with any child." The suggestion is honestly hurtful. He said it with such conviction that for a moment, I felt the old doubt creeping back in. The same doubt that had plagued me for years. Maybe I was wrong, maybe I was remembering wrong, maybe I was the problem. But then I remembered Daniel's question from the night before: what if you keeping his secret means other kids get hurt? "Dad, I remember everything. The tent, the things you said about special love, the way you told me it had to be our secret. I remember all of it." His expression shifted again, and this time I saw something that made my blood run cold. Not guilt or shame, but irritation. Annoyance that I was being difficult about something he considered settled. "Sarah, you were a troubled teenager. Your mother and I were very concerned about some of the stories you told, the attention-seeking behavior. We even considered getting you counseling, but you seemed to outgrow it." He spoke slowly, deliberately, like he was explaining something to a child. "I understand that you might have convinced yourself that these fantasies were real, but I can't let you project your psychological issues onto my relationship with Daniel." The gaslighting was so complete, so practiced, that I realized he'd been preparing this defense for years. Maybe decades. He wasn't just denying what he'd done, he was rewriting my entire adolescence, making me the unreliable narrator of my own trauma. I want you to stay away from Daniel, I said, standing up from the table. Sarah. His voice carried a warning now, the same tone he'd used when I was a child and had pushed too far. You're not thinking clearly. And I won't let you keep my grandson away from me because of your personal problems. If necessary, I'll talk to a lawyer about grandparents' rights. There it was. The threat wrapped in concern, the manipulation disguised as love. He wasn't going to acknowledge what he'd done. He wasn't going to promise to change. He was going to fight me, using the same tools he'd always used, making me doubt myself while positioning himself as the reasonable adult dealing with a hysterical woman. I looked around his kitchen one more time, at the photos of our family, at the coffee mug that said "World's Greatest Grandpa," at the man who'd taught me that love and violation could wear the same face. Goodbye, Dad, I said. Sarah, don't be dramatic. Sit back down and let's discuss this like adults. But I was already walking toward the door, already understanding that diplomacy had been a fool's hope. You couldn't negotiate with someone who refused to admit the truth. You couldn't find middle ground with someone who'd spent decades perfecting the art of making victims doubt their own memories. As I drove home, I thought about all the other conversations happening in houses across America. Fathers convincing daughters they were misremembering, grandfathers preparing legal threats against mothers who tried to protect their children, families choosing the comfort of denial over the difficulty of truth. My father had made his choice. Now I had to make mine. My brother Tommy called at 6 that evening, and I could tell from his tone that my father had gotten to him first. 23 years of marriage to Jennifer had mellowed Tommy's edges, but I could still hear the protective big brother underneath his careful words. Sarah, what the hell is going on? Dad just called me, crying. Crying, Sarah. I've never seen that man cry, not even at Mom's funeral. I was standing in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd shattered Daniel's world the night before, watching him do homework at the table. He looked up when I answered the phone, and I saw the wariness in his expression. We both knew this was coming, the family mobilization, the circling of wagons around my father's reputation. He told you. It wasn't a question. He told me you've been having some kind of breakdown. That you're keeping Daniel away from him because of some crazy accusations about camping trips from when you were a kid. Tommy's voice was careful, but I could hear the disbelief underneath. Sarah, please tell me you're not seriously suggesting that, Dad. I'm not suggesting anything. I'm stating facts. The silence stretched between us, filled with 36 years of sibling history. Tommy who'd taught me to throw a softball. Tommy who'd driven me to prom when my date's car broke down. Tommy who'd walked me down the aisle at my wedding because Dad was too emotional to do it without breaking down. Sarah, I lived in the same house you did. If something like that was happening, don't you think I would have noticed? The question hit exactly where it was supposed to. Because that was the brilliant thing about my father's strategy, he'd divided us so completely that we'd never compared notes. Tommy got baseball games and fishing trips and father-son talks about being a man. I got special camping trips and secrets and mature daughter responsibilities. You were busy with your own life, I said. And he made sure you were. Do you remember how he always had something planned for you whenever I went on those camping trips? How you were never around when I came back? Jesus, Sarah. Listen to yourself. You're talking about our father. He is some kind of predator. Daniel's pencil stopped moving across his paper. I could see him listening, processing, understanding that his family was fracturing in real time. Tommy's voice was getting harder now, more defensive. Let's say, hypothetically, that something happened back then. Something you thought was wrong. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell Mom? We were your family too. It was the question I'd been dreading, the one that cut straight to the heart of my own shame. Why hadn't I told? Why had I protected the man who'd hurt me instead of asking for help from the people who loved me? Because he told me it would destroy our family. Because he said no one would believe me. Because I was 13 and terrified and he convinced me that keeping his secret was the same as keeping everyone safe. So you're saying Mom and I failed you? The accusation hung in the air like smoke, and I realized this was exactly what my father had counted on. That any revelation would fracture into blame, that the family would turn on itself instead of on him. I'm saying he manipulated a child, I said quietly. And now he's trying to manipulate you. Dad's 74 years old, Sarah. He's a deacon at the church. Half the kids in this town learned to play baseball from him. You're asking me to believe that the man who taught me right from wrong, who worked 2 jobs to put us both through college, is some kind of monster. I heard the pain in his voice, the impossible choice I was forcing him to make. Choose between believing his sister or believing his father. Choose between protecting his nephew or protecting his hero. Tommy, I need to ask you something, and I need you to really think about your answer. I took a breath, preparing to detonate another bomb. Did anything ever happen to you? Anything you might have forgotten or pushed away or told yourself was normal? The pause was longer this time. No. Nothing like what you're suggesting ever happened to me. But there was something in his voice, a hesitation that made me press harder. What about your friends? The kids from the team? Do you remember anyone who suddenly stopped coming around? Anyone who quit baseball without explanation? Another pause. Sarah, you're grasping at straws. Marcus. The name slipped out before I could stop it. Our cousin Marcus, Tommy's age, who'd spent every summer at our house until he turned 16 and then suddenly stopped visiting. No explanation, no big fight, just a gradual fade until he wasn't part of our family anymore. What about Marcus? Tommy's voice was sharper now. When's the last time you talked to him? I don't know. Years. People grow apart, Sarah. That's normal. He was like your brother for 10 years, and then nothing. Doesn't that seem strange to you? You're connecting dots that don't exist. But I could hear uncertainty creeping into his voice, and I pressed my advantage. Call him, Tommy. Ask him why he stopped coming to family gatherings. Ask him what happened that last summer. This is insane. You're trying to drag other people into your delusions. Or maybe I'm finally seeing a pattern that's been there all along. Daniel had given up all pretense of doing homework. He was watching me with those serious eyes, and I realized he was learning something important about how families protect themselves, how they choose comfortable lies over difficult truths. Look, Tommy said, his voice gentling. I can see you really believe this. And maybe something did happen that you misunderstood at the time. But Dad's an old man now. Even if there was some kind of misunderstanding when you were kids, he's not a threat to anyone anymore. The words were so perfectly chosen, so completely beside the point, that I almost laughed. Some kind of misunderstanding. As if rape was a communication problem. He wants to take Daniel camping, Tommy. Overnight. Just the 2 of them. The silence stretched long enough for him to process what I was saying. Long enough for him to imagine his own son in a tent with our father. Long enough for doubt to creep in. Maybe, he said finally, maybe it would be better if those camping trips didn't happen. Just to be safe. It was the smallest possible concession, but it was something. An acknowledgement that maybe, possibly, I might not be completely crazy. Thank you, I said. But Sarah, you can't go around making accusations like this. You'll destroy him. You'll destroy our family. And there it was, the choice that had been haunting me for 23 years. Destroy my father or let him potentially destroy someone else. Protect the family or protect the children. What if he's still doing it? I asked. What if there are other kids, and my silence is what's allowing it to continue? Then you call the police, Tommy said, but his voice had no conviction. But you better be damn sure before you ruin an innocent man's life. After I hung up, Daniel looked at me across the kitchen table. Uncle Tommy doesn't believe you. Uncle Tommy doesn't want to believe me. There's a difference. What are we going to do? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Because calling the police meant crossing a line I could never uncross. It meant accepting that my family would never be the same. It meant watching my father become a registered sex offender, watching my brother choose sides, watching our extended family fracture into believers and deniers. But not calling meant living with the possibility that somewhere, another 13-year-old was being told she was special, that she was mature enough to handle her grandfather's love, that keeping secrets was how you protected your family. My phone buzzed with a text message from a number I didn't recognize. This is Marcus. Tommy gave me your number. He said you've been asking about Dad. Can we talk? I stared at the message, my hands shaking. Because suddenly the pattern wasn't just visible, it was undeniable. Daniel read the message over my shoulder. Mom? Baby? I think it's time to call the police. I looked at my 15-year-old son, this brave boy who'd forced me to face truths I'd been avoiding for decades, and realized he was right. It had always been time. I'd just been too afraid to admit it. But fear wasn't protecting anyone anymore. It was only protecting my father. The choice was finally clear, even if the consequences weren't. Marcus called back within an hour, and his voice sounded exactly like I remembered, quiet, careful, weighted with the same caution I'd learned to carry. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop 3 towns over, neutral territory where neither of us would run into family members or childhood neighbors who still thought of our father as a pillar of the community. I told Daniel I was going out for groceries and would be back by 9. He nodded without asking questions, this boy who'd become my partner in truth-telling, and I realized something fundamental had shifted between us. We weren't just mother and son anymore, we were allies in a war against secrets. The drive gave me time to think, to prepare for a conversation I'd been avoiding for 20 years. Marcus had been Tommy's best friend, practically a third brother during those long summers when he'd stay at our house for weeks at a time. He'd been funny, fearless, the kind of kid who could talk his way out of any trouble. Until the summer he turned 16, when something in him went quiet and careful and he stopped coming around. I'd wondered about it at the time, but I was dealing with my own survival, my own careful navigation of family dynamics. And by then, I'd learned not to ask too many questions about why people changed around my father. Marcus was already waiting when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with his back to the wall, coffee untouched in front of him. 20 years had aged him well, he was still lean, still had that careful way of watching everything, but there was something settled about him now, like someone who'd made peace with difficult truths. Sarah. He stood to hug me, and it felt like hugging a ghost from a past life. You look good. Older, but good. So do you. I slid into the booth across from him, studying his face for signs of what I was hoping not to find. How are Jennifer and the kids? Good. Really good. His smile was genuine when he talked about his family, and I felt a flicker of relief. Whatever had happened to him, he'd managed to build something healthy afterward. Emma's 14 now, and Mike just turned 12. The mention of his children's ages made something cold settle in my stomach. 14. 12. The same ages when everything had started for me. Marcus, Tommy said you might know why I wanted to talk. He nodded slowly, his fingers drumming against his coffee cup. He said you've been asking questions about Uncle Robert. About why I stopped coming around. Uncle Robert. It was what Marcus had always called my father, and hearing it now made me realize how much trust my father had built with other families. How many parents had been grateful for his attention to their children, his willingness to mentor and guide and spend special time with kids who needed a positive male influence. I need to know what happened that last summer. Marcus was quiet for a long time, staring out the window at the parking lot where normal people were living normal lives, going to coffee shops without carrying decades-old secrets. I was 15, he said finally. My parents were having problems, they ended up divorcing the next year, and your dad offered to let me stay with you guys for the whole summer. Said it would be good for me to be in a stable home environment. I nodded, remembering that summer. By then, the camping trips with me had mostly stopped. I was 16 and had learned to say no, to find excuses, to make myself unavailable. I'd thought I was finally safe. He was great at first, Marcus continued. Really great. Like having the father I'd always wanted but never had. He taught me things, paid attention to me, made me feel important. Special. The word hit me like a physical blow. Special. The same word my father had used with me. He suggested we go camping, just the two of us. Said boys needed to learn independence, that it would help me become a man. Marcus's voice was steady, but I could see his hands shaking slightly. I was excited. I'd never been camping before. I closed my eyes, seeing it all happening again through different eyes. The same tent, the same isolated location, the same gentle voice explaining special love and family secrets. But this time it was Marcus in the darkness, Marcus being told he was mature enough to handle something most boys couldn't understand. How long? I asked quietly. That summer. For camping trips. Then I went home, and I never came back. Did you tell anyone? Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. Tell them what? That Uncle Robert had shown me special attention? That he'd taught me things about love and trust? Your father was very good at making it sound like a gift. The same script, perfected over years of practice. I wondered how many children he'd used it on, how many families he'd charmed his way into. Marcus, I'm thinking about going to the police. He looked at me sharply, and for a moment I saw the scared 15-year-old he'd been. After all this time? He's been asking to take my son camping. Overnight. Just the two of them. Understanding dawned in Marcus's expression, followed by something harder. How old is Daniel? 15. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. The same age I was. We sat in silence, both of us thinking about what we knew and what we couldn't prove, about statute of limitations and family reputations and the impossible weight of secrets carried too long. If I go to the police, I said, will you back me up? Sarah, it's been 20 years. There's no physical evidence, no witnesses. It would be his word against ours, and he's a respected member of the community. But there are two of us now. And maybe others. Marcus nodded slowly. Maybe others. I pulled out my phone and showed him the text he'd sent. When you said dad, you meant my father, didn't you? Not your biological father. He told me to call him dad, Marcus said quietly. Said it proved I was really part of the family. That I was his boy now. The possessiveness in that phrase, the way my father had claimed ownership over children who weren't his, made my skin crawl. But it also made me angry in a way I hadn't been angry in years. A clean, purposeful anger that felt like power. Marcus, what if we're not the only ones? What if there are other kids, other families, and everyone's staying quiet because they think they're protecting someone? Or what if there aren't, and we destroy an old man's reputation over something that can't be proven? It was the same question Tommy had asked, the same doubt that had kept me silent for 23 years. But sitting across from Marcus, seeing the careful way he held himself, the way he'd learned to watch for exits, I realized the question wasn't whether we could prove what had happened. The question was whether we could live with ourselves if we stayed silent and it happened again. He's not going to stop on his own, I said. Men like him don't just decide they've done enough damage. Marcus nodded. You're right. And Sarah? There's something else you should know. He pulled out his own phone, scrolled through his contacts, and showed me a name. About 5 years ago, I got a Facebook message from this guy. Jake Morrison, do you remember him? He was on Tommy's little league team. I remembered Jake. Quiet kid, good player, came to our house for team barbecues and birthday parties. Another child my father had taken special interest in, had offered to mentor and guide. Jake found me through mutual friends, said he'd been looking for other people who might have had experiences with Coach Robert. He's a therapist now, works with trauma victims. He said he's been carrying this for 20 years, wondering if he was the only one. My heart started beating faster. Have you talked to him? Once. Briefly. We both got scared and backed off. But Sarah, if there are 3 of us that we know about, how many others might there be? I thought about all the children who'd passed through my father's orbit over the decades. Baseball players, church kids, neighbors' sons, foster children he'd volunteered to mentor. All those families who'd trusted him, who'd been grateful for his attention to their boys. I want to call Jake, I said. Are you sure? Once you start making these calls, there's no going back. People are going to choose sides, and not everyone's going to choose ours. I thought about Daniel doing homework in our kitchen, about the camping trip my father was still planning, about all the future children who might sit in tents listening to explanations about special love. I'm sure. Marcus gave me Jake's number, and I programmed it into my phone with hands that were finally steady. For the first time in 23 years, I wasn't carrying this secret alone. For the first time in my adult life, I had allies instead of doubts. There's one more thing, Marcus said as we prepared to leave. Your father called me this afternoon. Before Tommy did. I stopped moving. What? He said he'd heard I was back in touch with family, and he wanted to congratulate me on my success, my business, my kids. He knew their names, Sarah. He knew what school Emma goes to. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. My father had spent 20 years keeping track of Marcus, making sure he understood that silence was still required, that the secret still needed protection. He's been monitoring you. And probably Jake too. And maybe others. That's how predators work, They don't just attack and disappear, they maintain control. I felt something crystallize inside me, hard and clear as ice. My father hadn't just stolen our childhoods, he'd been stealing our adult lives too, keeping us afraid, keeping us isolated, keeping us silent. But silence was a choice. And I was done choosing it. Marcus, I'm going to call the police tomorrow morning. With or without Jake, with or without anyone else. But I think it's time to stop protecting him. Marcus nodded, and I saw something shift in his expression, the same thing I felt shifting in myself. We weren't victims anymore. We were witnesses. And witnesses had power.